illustrates how the system actually works. Because what Milken did, and I think it was about 1978, was to set up in Beverly Hills, California, an office of Drexel Burnham Lambert, the investment bank, which was based in New York. And the Beverly Hills office was a place where he started selling junk bonds. He created the junk bond business. And a junk bond is, by definition, a corporate security which has a credit rating of less than investment grade. So it's commonly called a junk bond or a high yield bond. Now, to understand it, you have to take it out of the realm of a business story or a financial story. It's not really about bond ratings and things like that. And what they would do is that Milken would go to a company, let's say a casino, Steve Wynn's casino, because he helped build Las Vegas. And he would say, okay, we can raise money for you. You want to build a fancy new casino, we'll raise money by selling bonds. And since up to that point, the bond market had been only investment grade, blue chip companies. People thought of bonds as being very safe. So this idea that you would have these companies that might not really make it, that were somewhat shaky, issue bonds, this was a new thing.
Milken's monsters, as they were known, became the model for stock market speculation, finally obliterating the already thin line between organized crime and Wall Street. By the end of the 1980s, the entire U.S. economy was in a state of collapse. This collapse culminated with Black Monday in October of 1987, when the markets plunged 20%, setting the stage for the creation of the largest financial bubble in history by the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, who had been installed shortly before the collapse.
At that point, Greenspan said, I'm coming in, I'm going to fix everything. And he started this particular hyperinflationary system. He said, we can invent money. It was based on Michael Milken and Michael Milken's kind of experiment in California. Michael Milken went to prison for that. Huh? Greenspan legalized it and expanded it.
Again, an increasing flow of money, looted from the collapsing physical economy, was required to feed this ballooning bubble. This time, however, the money was not paper, but digital. And this time, the effects of hyperinflation were partially masked for the American population by the introduction of a policy of what was called euphemistically globalization. Under globalization, the United States trade policy was restructured after the model of the British East India Company. The cost of goods, which would otherwise be skyrocketing, was lowered in essence by looting the caloric intake of the populations of the developing world. This did not reduce the effects of inflation so much as spread it globally. Meanwhile, U.S. production was gutted even further, literally packed up and shipped overseas, where an underfed, undereducated, overworked labor force cheapened the immediate costs of production. At the same time, a move was made to addict the American population to lines of credit.
The first thing you do is you make sure that they don't earn enough money to buy what they need without taking on debt. And that comes from killing the productive side of the economy. So that instead of having high-paying manufacturing jobs, a lot of high-paying jobs, you have these low-paying service jobs, retail jobs, things like that. You know, and with globalization, we've seen a continual downward push on wages under the theory that we have to be competitive in wages with some country on the other side of the world. This method of using debt to control is very important. And it also gives you some insight, considering how in debt the United States is, of how some of the what some of the levers are that are used to control us.
Over the course of the 90s, the mechanisms created by Greenspan for rolling over the debt continued to snowball. The derivatives market spread across the globe.
Every time they turn around, they will create a debt. They will calculate the anticipated income on the debt that they just created. They will then capitalize the income they just fictionalized. They will take a multiplier factor, say a 3% ratio, okay, it's the corresponding figure. Right? So now you capitalize a debt, an asset of that magnitude. There's nothing behind it. It's only the imagination. So it's like what happened in Weimar, the Weimar 1923. Only in the imagination does this system viable. This system is measured in these kinds of estimations in quadrillions of dollars of estimated value. But nobody ever produced those quadrillions of dollars. They're not being produced now, they never were produced. Which means that the system depends upon the assumed income, like an interest income, on a debt which is not real. So it's not the fact that you have a boundary condition of a finite amount of value. The nominal value is just expanding with no reason whatsoever in absolute madness. Now you're calculating the profit based on the yield, the average yield, on this mass of fictitious value.
This carnival reached its limit in the autumn of 1998.
In 1998, you had the Russian government announced that it was postponing payments on some of its government bonds, the GKO bonds. And this sent shockwaves through the financial world. Not because the amount of money was significant, because it really wasn't that much money, but because here was a sovereign government telling the financial markets no. If a government says no and can back that up, then the game is over.
In a desperate effort to re-inflate a collapsing system, the Y2K scam was launched. Consumers were convinced that come January 1st, 2000, all functions run on the two-digit date system would come to a screeching halt. Calendars would roll over from December 1999 straight to January 1900 unless new software was purchased to further inflate the tech bubble. Hotshots with no skills other than website design became millionaires overnight. The Nasdaq stock market index soared, nearly tripling over the next 18 months.
The way they dealt with this was a thing that George Soros referred to as the wall of money. The central banks started lowering their interest rates and flooding the markets with liquidity, trying to get people to buy again. And then you had this scheme to create a tech bubble, to pump up the high-tech stocks, the internet stocks, the computer stocks, and that sort of thing, as a way of getting things going again. So they started pumping a bunch of money into these things and actually created, going into the last half of 1999, a mania. So we went from, oh my God, the system just died, to a mania in a year. And in the mania, the tech bubble mania, everybody was buying stocks. It was, your cabbie would give you stock tips, that kind of stuff. And everybody wanted in on it. People were using their credit cards to buy stocks because the things were just all going straight up. And they just kept going up and up and up until it blew up. And then it was all over. But the effect of it was to bring the system back. It restarted it.
After the blowout of the Y2K bubble, the critical point of discontinuity was reached. The final phases of looting the U.S. physical economy had to commence, and new avenues of money pumping had to be found. The looming specter of terrorism following the September 11th attacks distracted the population from the hemorrhaging economy, while serving as yet another pretense to pump in more cash. Simultaneously, enormous amounts of money were offered to the now deregulated banks for home loans. Banks began appraising housing prices at higher and higher levels, and new housing development skyrocketed.